500 motorcycles parked bumper to bumper along a gravel road in Pickett County, Tennessee had never happened before. Not on a Sunday. Not on any day. The county had a population of 4,900 people and a single traffic light and a hardware store that closed at noon on Saturdays, and the kind of quiet that the rest of the world has mostly forgotten. A county deputy named Roy Sykes pulled onto Laurel Fork Road at 7:12 that Sunday morning, saw what was parked along it, and sat in his cruiser for a full minute before he picked up the radio. He did not know what to say. He did not know how to explain 500 Outlaws MC motorcycles lined up in disciplined silence on a gravel road in front of a green shuttered farmhouse belonging to a 74-year-old widow named Agnes Pearl Holcomb. Nobody had called the police. Nobody had organized a march. Nobody had sent a press release. It had started the night before with a woman who had $12 and a pot of soup on the stove and a stranger at her door in the dark, and it had ended, if ended is even the right word, with something that Pickett County would be talking about for the rest of its life. The farmhouse sat at the end of Laurel Fork Road, the way old farmhouses sit, like they grew there. Like the hill shaped itself around them rather than the other way around. It had green shutters and a porch that needed a board replaced, and a kitchen garden that Agnes Holcomb kept in good order from March through October, because George had kept it before her, and she saw no reason to let his rose go to weeds just because he was gone. The road that led to it was unpaved and ran 3/4 of a mile from the county blacktop through second-growth timber that smelled of cedar and old rain, and the nearest neighbor was the Tatum family a half-mile east. And in winter, when the trees were bare, you could see their porch light from Agnes's kitchen window. That was the closest thing to company the road offered most nights. It was the second week of November. The temperature had been dropping since 4 in the afternoon, and by dark it was 23 degrees, and the sky was the color of old iron, and the wind came off the ridge with the specific cold of high country in early winter that goes through a jacket instead of around it. The road into the county had been closed since 6 that evening. A washout on the 111 connector had taken out a 40-foot section of guardrail, and the highway department had shut it down until morning. This meant that anyone who had been moving through Pickett County on that road was not moving anymore. Trace Maddox had been moving through Pickett County since 2 in the afternoon. He was 57 years old. He had a face that looked like it had been left out in the weather for several decades, which it had, and hands the size of dinner plates, and a riding jacket with the Outlaws MC patch on the back, that had been earned over 31 years and that he wore with the matter-of-fact authority of a man who does not need anyone to understand what it means. He was 6 feet and 2 inches and weighed 235 pounds, and when he walked into a room, the room knew it. He had been the sergeant-at-arms of the Tennessee chapter for 9 years and the chapter president for 4. He did not look like a man who lost his way, because he was not. He had ridden up from Nashville that morning to visit a sister in Livingston, and he had stayed 2 hours past when he meant to leave because it had been 6 months since he had seen her and he had not wanted to go. The road closure had caught him on the wrong side of the 111 and rerouted him onto a county road he did not know in the dark in 23 degrees, and the Harley had run fine until the temperature dropped 3 more degrees and the fuel line did what fuel lines sometimes do in cold that hits fast, and the bike had coughed and died on Laurel Fork Road at 8:47 in the evening with the farmhouse. Lights just visible through the bare trees ahead. Trace Maddox was carrying something he had not told anyone. His mother had died in March. She had lived alone in a house in Dickson County for the last 11 years of her life, and he had visited when he could, but he had not visited enough, and in the last year of her life, she had gone 3 weeks without a hot meal that someone else made for her, and he knew this because her neighbor had told him at the funeral in a tone that was not accusing but that had accused him anyway, in the way that true things do. He had been riding with that knowledge since March. He had not found a way to set it down. He left the bike on the shoulder and walked toward the lights. Before we get to what happened when Agnes Holcomb opened that door, subscribe and drop your city in the comments. I want to see where this story finds you, because what she does next is something most people would not do, and I think you need to know it happened. Back to Laurel Fork Road. Back to the knock on Agnes Pearl Holcomb's door at 8:53 on a November night. Agnes Pearl Holcomb was 74 years old and had lived on Laurel Fork Road for 49 of those years, since she and George had bought the place in 1975 for $62,000 and spent the first summer fixing the roof and the second summer replacing the kitchen floor, and every summer after that doing the work that a working farm requires of the people who live on it. George had died 6 years ago. He had been a quiet man with a talent for making things grow and a habit of whistling the same 3 bars of a hymn he could never quite remember the rest of, and she still heard it sometimes when the wind came off the ridge a certain way. She had 2 daughters, Lynette in Cookville and Sandra in Murfreesboro, and they called on Sundays and at Christmas and meant to visit more than they did. Agnes did not hold this against them. They had lives. She understood what lives required. She kept a kitchen garden. She preserved in August. She made a soup every Sunday from whatever the week had left in the refrigerator and the pantry, and she ate it for 3 days, which was the rhythm George had established and which she had seen no reason to alter. She still set 2 placemats on the kitchen table each morning, a habit she had noticed herself maintaining and had decided not to examine too closely, because some habits are load-bearing and you do not pull at them. What most people who looked at Agnes Holcomb saw, a small woman with white hair cut short and reading glasses on a chain and a tendency to address strangers as honey the first time and by their given name every time after. What they did not see, because she did not display it, that she had taught herself to tile a bathroom floor at the age of 68, that she had single-handedly planted 37 fence posts the spring after George died, and that she had been fighting for 14 months against a property development company called Pinnacle Land Partners ALC, which wanted the farmhouse, the 42 acres it sat on, and the road that ran through them, and which had sent her 3 letters, 2 certified. Any man in a gray suit to her door in August to explain, in language that was technically polite and structurally a threat, that the offer on the table was the best she was going to see. The letter she had received 3 days ago from Pinnacle's attorney informed her that if she had not signed the transfer agreement by the 30th of November, they would be proceeding with the eminent domain petition that had been filed with the county in September. She had read it twice, folded it, and put it in the drawer under the telephone where she kept things that needed to be dealt with and that she was not ready to deal with yet. She had $12 in her wallet. She had a pot of soup on the stove, potato and leek. Heavy on the leek because the garden had come in strong that fall, and half a loaf of bread and enough in the pantry to last the week if she was careful, which she always was. The property tax bill had come in October and she had paid it the way she paid everything, first before anything else, because George had taught her that a person who keeps current on their obligations is a person who keeps their dignity, and dignity was not negotiable. The property tax had left her with $43 until her Social Security came in on the 14th, and she had spent 31 of those dollars on propane and had 12 left, and she was not worried. She had been careful her whole life. Careful got you through. She was washing the soup pot when something knocked on her door. She turned the burner down and dried her hands and went to the door and turned on the porch light, which threw a yellow cone of light out into the dark and the cold, and opened the door. The man on her porch was the largest human being she had personally encountered. He was wearing a riding jacket, and his breath was coming in long clouds in the cold, and his hands were blue at the knuckles, and he had the particular expression of a man who does not often need help, and is not comfortable needing it now. "Ma'am," he said, "I'm sorry to bother you. My bike broke down on your road. I need to make a call and my phone's dead." Agnes looked at him for a moment. "How long have you been out in this?" she said. "Little while." "Come in," she said, "before you freeze." He did not want to come in. She could see that. He stood in the doorway a moment too long, and looked at his boots and said he didn't want to track in, and she said the floor had seen worse, which was true, and she stepped back from the door, and after a moment he came inside. She pointed him at the kitchen table and put the phone in front of him and went to the stove. She had the soup back on the burner before he had finished dialing. He made one call, 3 sentences, a location, a time, and then sat with the phone in his hands and looked at the kitchen the way a man looks at a room that reminds him of something he cannot immediately name. "I'll get out of your hair," he said. "Brother's coming." "Soup's hot," Agnes said. "Sit, ma'am, I can't. It's potato and leek." She set a bowl in front of him. "Sit." He looked at the bowl. He looked at her. He sat. She cut 2 slices of bread and put them beside the bowl and went back to the stove and ladled her own portion, smaller than his, and sat down across from him and put her napkin in her lap the way she had done every meal of her life, because her mother had done it and her mother's mother before that. He said his name was Trace. She said hers was Agnes. They ate. He did not talk much. She did not require him to. She had been married for 43 years to a quiet man, and she understood that some people need the silence of a meal to come back to themselves, and she gave him that. She asked him once where he was writing from, and he said Nashville, and she said she had a daughter in Murfreesboro, and he nodded and said it was good country, and she agreed that it was. When the bowl was empty, he looked at it for a moment. "My mother made soup," he said, "every Sunday." He did not say anything else after that. Agnes looked at him. "She's gone?" "March," he said. Agnes folded her hands around her own bowl. "I'm sorry. I should have visited more." She was quiet a moment. Then she said, "We all carry that." He looked up. His eyes were the color of creek water after rain, and they had in them the particular quality of a man who does not allow himself to feel things in front of other people and was not entirely in control of that right now. He looked back down. "I should get outside," he said. "Wait for my brother. It's 23 degrees, Agnes said. "You wait in here." He waited in there. The man who came for him was named Chopper Briggs, the Outlaws Tennessee chapter's road captain, and he arrived at 9:41 in a pickup truck with a trailer hitch and a tow strap and the particular unruffled efficiency of a man who has recovered broken down motorcycles in the dark many times before. He knocked once, came in when Trace called from the kitchen, nodded at Agnes, accepted the coffee she put in front of him without comment, and drank it in 4 minutes while they talked about the fuel line. When he stood to go, he looked at Agnes. "Ma'am," he said, "what do we owe you?" "Not a thing," Agnes said. "You fed him and you warmed him up and you gave us both coffee." That's what you do," Agnes said, "when somebody knocks in the cold." Chopper Briggs looked at Trace. Trace looked at his coffee cup. "Yes, ma'am," Chopper said. They loaded the bike. Trace came back to the door to say goodbye, and Agnes was standing in the kitchen, and he stood in the doorway the way he had stood at the beginning, too large for the frame. "Thank you," he said, "for the soup." "George's recipe," Agnes said. "He'd be glad it went somewhere." Trace nodded. He put his hand in his jacket pocket and she saw what he was doing and said, "Don't." He stopped. "Don't," she said again. Not sharp. Certain, he took his hand out of his pocket. He nodded once more and went. Agnes turned off the porch light and went back to the stove and washed the 2 extra bowls and the 2 extra cups. And then she sat at the kitchen table alone in the warmth and looked at the empty placemat across from her and thought about George whistling the 3 bars he could never finish. And she put her hands flat on the table and held onto the quiet. In the truck on the way back to Livingston, Chopper Briggs drove and said nothing for a while. Then he said, "She feed you?" "Yes," Trace said. "She take anything for it?" "No." Chopper said nothing for another mile. Then he said, "She got people?" Trace was quiet. He looked out the window at the dark timber going past. He was thinking about $12. He did not know for certain that she had $12. But he had been in that kitchen, and he had seen it the way a man sees a room when he is paying attention. The careful size of the soup portions, the half a loaf cut precise, the way she had given him the larger bowl without discussion, and he had done the math that 49 years of a man whose mother had once gone 3 weeks without a hot meal had taught him to do. "I don't think so," he said. "Not close." Chopper drove another half mile. "Pinnacle Land Partners," Trace said. "You know what that is? Development company, out of Nashville." Chopper's jaw set. "They've been going after farm parcels up in this county for 2 years. Eminent domain petition. County commission is involved." Trace was quiet. "How much land?" Chopper asked. 42 acres, farmhouse on it." "Road." Chopper said nothing else. He pulled onto the county blacktop and the headlights swept the wet road ahead. Somewhere behind them, on Laurel Fork Road, the green-shuttered farmhouse sat at the end of its 3/4-mile lane with 1 light burning in the kitchen window. "Send it to the chapter," Trace said. Chopper picked up his phone. The message went out at 10:23 that night on the Tennessee chapter's channel. 47 words. No one who received it needed more than that. By 10:45, it had been forwarded to the Ohio chapter, the Kentucky chapter, and the Georgia chapter. By midnight, it had crossed into Indiana and the Carolinas. Trace Maddox did not see most of this happen because he had fallen asleep in the passenger seat somewhere north of Livingston with his head against the glass and his arms folded over his chest, the way a mind sleeps when something heavy has been set down. At 6:00 on Sunday morning, the first bikes came down Laurel Fork Road. They came quietly, 2 abreast, down the gravel lane through the cedar timber. The frost on the road showed their tracks. The sky was still gray, and the temperature had not broken 30 degrees, and they came anyway, from the highway, from the county roads feeding off it, from places that were more than 2 hours away and had been started before 5 in the morning. They came because 47 words had been sent, and they had read them, and because some things do not require further explanation. By 6:47, Deputy Roy Sykes had stopped his cruiser on the county blacktop and was looking at what Laurel Fork Road had become and trying to decide what the radio call for this situation was. Agnes Pearl Holcomb heard them from her bedroom. She was already awake. She was always awake by 5:30, and she was sitting on the edge of her bed with her feet on the floor and her reading glasses in her hand, the way she sat each morning before she became fully committed to the day. She heard the sound from the direction of the road. Low at first, then not low, then something she did not have a word for. She put her glasses on and went to the window. The sun was not fully up. In the pale gray light, the lane through the cedar timber was filled, as far as she could see, with motorcycles moving slowly toward the house. Not fast, not loud, with the careful deliberateness of a procession. She watched for a long time without moving. She counted to 30 and stopped counting because the counting was not the point. She went to the kitchen and put the coffee on, because it was the only thing she knew to do. At 6:53, Trace Maddox knocked on her door. She opened it and looked at him, and then past him at the lane and the road, at the chrome showing through the bare trees in the early light. At the figures standing beside their bikes in the cold, 500 of them, silent, helmets in their hands, breath rising in the still air above the ridge. She looked back at Trace. "What is this?" she said. "This is people who want you to know you're not fighting this alone," he said. "If you want to fight it." Agnes looked at the lane again, at the frost on the gravel and the breath rising and the chrome in the early light, and 500 men standing in 29 degrees because a woman in Pickett County had given a stranger soup and refused to take anything for it. She was not a woman who cried easily. She had planted 37 fence posts by herself. She had taught herself to tile a bathroom floor. She had held George's hand for 3 days in the hospital and driven herself home from the funeral and gone back to the kitchen garden the following week because the rows needed turning. She had read 3 letters from Pinnacle Land Partners LLC and put them in the drawer with her hands steady. She stood in the doorway and looked at Laurel Fork Road in the early morning light and said nothing for a long time. Then she said, "I suppose I'd better make more coffee." Trace Maddox looked at her. The first genuine thing that had been on his face in a long time moved across it, and it was not quite a smile, and it was not quite grief, and it was both of those things and something else besides. "Yes, ma'am," he said. The Pinnacle Land Partners eminent domain petition was withdrawn from the County Commission's docket on the 17th of November, 8 days later. The attorney who had filed it did not comment publicly. The county commissioner who had been sponsoring it declined to seek re-election the following spring. These events were stated in the Pickett County Courier in 2 separate brief paragraphs with no editorial flourish, because that is how small-town newspapers report the outcomes of things that larger institutions would rather not discuss. Agnes Holcomb did not sell the farmhouse. She did not sell the 42 acres. The road that ran through them remained unpaved and hers. In the spring, 6 men she had never met arrived on a Saturday with lumber and tools and spent the day replacing the porch board that had needed replacing since the previous year. They were gone by 4. She had fed them lunch and they had let her, because they understood by then that letting Agnes feed you was its own form of respect. She still sets 2 placemats on the kitchen table each morning. She still makes soup on Sundays. The kitchen garden came in strong again last August, heavy on the leak. Trace Maddox rode back up to Pickett County in the spring, on a day when the timber along Laurel Fork Road was green and the kitchen garden was just coming in. He did not call ahead. He came with a bag of groceries from the store in Livingston, things she hadn't asked for and wouldn't have bought, and left them on the porch with a note that said only, "For the Sunday soup." He did not knock. He got back on the Harley and rode south. Agnes found the bag when she came out to deadhead the geraniums. She read the note. She stood on the porch in the spring sun for a moment. Then she went inside and put the groceries away and picked up the phone and called Sandra in Murfreesboro and talked for 40 minutes about nothing in particular, which is to say, about everything that mattered. There is a kind of person who gives what they have left when someone knocks in the cold, not because they have extra, because they believe, against all the evidence the world keeps producing, that people are worth it, that the stranger at the door is worth it, that the next meal can be figured out later, and what cannot be figured out later is whether you were the person who opened the door or the person who left the porch light off. Agnes Pearl Holcomb turned on her porch light. 500 people remembered. If this story reached you, if you believe that the smallest acts of kindness are the ones that echo longest, hit the like button and share this with someone who needs to remember that. Subscribe so you never miss the next one. And drop a comment below, have you ever given something when you didn't have much left to give? Tell me where you're watching from. I read every single one.